Something new is happening on the moon. The year is 2050. Humans are scratching out a living despite the merciless conditions. Sun hotter than the Sahara, shade colder than Antarctica, and a life-sucking vacuum that kills in minutes. But in the rugged wilderness of the lunar South Pole, on the rim of a crater, twice as deep as the Grand Canyon, bustling settlements sprout out of moon dust. Corporations and nations compete against one another, exploiting the moon's resources for profit, science, and military advantage. This is not science fiction, because people are already making it real. Around the globe, human beings are preparing themselves for life on the moon.
Please make sure all shoulder harnesses are securely fastened. In a few moments, we'll be landing at Shackleton Lunar Spaceport.
Welcome to the future. The moon has been transformed from an alien world into an extension of Earth. The first human outpost on another world, and our first decisive step towards becoming a spacefaring species. But whose moon is it?
Yes, the vehicle has lifted off. Vehicle has lifted off.
India, China, Japan, Russia, Europe, and the United States all want in on the action.
Falcon 9 is the most powerful single-core vehicle in the American fleet, and when Falcon 9 Heavy...
Not to mention entrepreneurs.
Today, there are 1,200 billionaires on this planet. And what it used to take a large government agency to do, a small group of dedicated individuals with the right computational capabilities can now do.
Private or government, foreign or American, to get to the moon this century, everyone must overcome the same set of hurdles. Because there will be nothing on the moon until humans put it there. No shelter, no transportation, no food and water, no electricity, no spacesuits, no landers, nothing. Every person, habitat, vehicle, nut, bolt, and scrap of food must be lifted off the Earth and transported 400,000 kilometers through space. Step one for getting back to the moon is the most difficult. Getting this unprecedented load out of Earth's gravity.
Escaping Earth's gravity is kind of like climbing out of a well. And you start out at the bottom of the well. And it's going to be a lot of work to climb your way out.
NASA calls its new moon program Constellation. Plans call for not one rocket, but two. People will travel on a small rocket called Ares-1. Everything else needed for lunar settlement will be transported on a larger rocket, Ares-5. This monster will stand nearly 120 meters tall, the largest rocket ever built.
Go.
Together, these two rockets will be able to lift twice as much as the giant Saturn V rocket of the 1960s.
15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10.
40 years ago, during the Apollo program, it carried astronauts and all their equipment to the moon. But the new Ares-5 will carry 10% more.
Instead of having a maximum payload of about 48 metric tons that the Saturn could deliver, you can probably get that up to about 54 metric tons, which means that you can have a larger landing vehicle. You can take 4 crew instead of 2. Just a whole bunch of additional advantages for having that larger payload.
But designing 2 new rockets can take years and lots of failures along the way. So NASA's not going to start from scratch.
What we've come up with is actually to use heritage systems off the shuttle and Apollo, which, number one, gives us a lot of reliability data. We have a lot of experience with flying those, so our likelihood of failure goes way down.
The first stage of the crew vehicle, Ares-1, is a solid rocket booster. It's the same one used on the space shuttle, but extended for more power. The second stage has an updated version of the 1960s Apollo engine. The heavy lifter, Ares-5, will be powered by 2 of the same larger shuttle boosters and a cluster of 5 main engines, derived from the ones used on another large rocket, the Delta IV. NASA engineers have spent 50 years making their launch system safer and more reliable. But tragic accidents happen.
Engines beginning throttling down now.
When the shuttle Challenger blew up 73 seconds after launch in 1986, there was no escape system. No way for the astronauts to survive. That's a design decision NASA's determined not to repeat. The new crew capsule, called Orion, looks a lot like the old Apollo, only larger. And like Apollo, it will have a way to save the crew from disaster.
On Orion, we actually have a launch escape system, launch abort system, that allows us to abort at any phase during the launch.
The launch abort system is another small rocket mounted on top of Orion. If something goes wrong during launch, the abort system's powerful engine can fire instantly, pulling the capsule and astronauts clear at 1,000 kilometers per hour. For several seconds, they must endure the sort of high G-forces normally experienced by fighter pilots before parachutes open, returning them and their capsule to Earth. As of today, NASA's aiming to have Constellation's lunar program designed, built, tested, and ready to launch in 10 years.
Final launch readiness poll, VM.
VM is go.
PLC.
It's the year 2020. At the Kennedy Space Center, the Orion capsule and its crew of 4 are just seconds away from heading back to the moon.
Ignition, we have liftoff.
Once off the launch pad, Ares-1's first stage solid rocket burns for just over 2 minutes, pushing the Orion crew capsule through the air at over 6,800 kilometers an hour, more than 5 times the speed of sound.
We're coming up on stage 1 separation event.
The spent first stage then separates, and the second stage fires, carrying the spacecraft to an altitude of 134 kilometers above the Earth.
We have confirmed fairing separation.
No longer needed, the launch abort system is jettisoned. Orion's service module engine takes it into low Earth orbit, 320 kilometers above the planet.
Systems are nominal.
Orion then unfolds the solar panels that will supply power. The first step of the new lunar mission is almost complete. The people have left the Earth. Now they need their equipment. Ares-5 blasts off next, carrying everything the crew will need for Step 2, getting to the moon.
Copy, Vince.
But to do that, the 2 rockets must first execute a critical and dangerous maneuver, rendezvous.
Locked on good data.
All vents open. Copy, Vince.
It's 2020. Human beings are heading back to the moon. The Orion crew capsule draws ever nearer to the giant Ares-5 cargo ship. Finally, the 2 vehicles dock safely. Now it's time for step 2 to begin. The engine on Ares 5 burns once more, pushing the crew up to 39,000 kilometers an hour, enough to slingshot them out of Earth's orbit and onto the moon. 4 days from now, they'll look down on a surface area as vast as Africa. So, where should they land?
The Apollo missions went to the equatorial and lower latitudes because those were very accessible from Earth. The lower latitudes are easier to get to from a rocket point of view.
Blocky rim crater.
The moon's equator is also flat and relatively boulder-free.
Oh, this is going to be some kind of different ride.
And since no Apollo crew spent more than 3 days on the moon, having enough light was never a problem either. They landed in the lunar morning, and a lunar day lasts for 2 weeks. The problem is the lunar night, which also lasts for 2 weeks. Astronauts can live off solar power for around 14 days. But then, they'd have to find a way to survive 14 days in darkness. And it's not just dark. It's cold. Minus 150 degrees centigrade. 4 times colder than Antarctica in the dead of winter. And without solar power, it could be deadly. The astronauts must find a reliable source of power.
You know, the best place that we could possibly go on the moon, if we're engaging in a frontier approach to space, where we're going to get there and build and grow something, are the poles.
The moon's orbit exposes both its north and south poles to virtually continuous sunlight. Bathed in that sunlight, almost exactly at the south pole, is Shackleton Crater. But there's a problem. The Shackleton Crater's steep walls are twice as deep as the Grand Canyon and climb to a ragged rim. No pilot in his right mind would attempt to land there. And it's uncharted territory, the perfect graveyard for a spacecraft.
Roger, 1201 alarm. 1201 alarm.
NASA engineers don't want a repeat of the first lunar landing in 1969.
Roger, 1202, we copy it.
Few watching at the time realized it was a near disaster. 100 meters above the surface, Neil Armstrong discovered his lander was heading for a field of large boulders.
4.5 down, 5.5 down.
He quickly looked around for a better spot and manually steered his way towards it,
4 forward, drifting to the right.
coming within 30 seconds of running out of fuel.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The last thing NASA wants is for the new mission to face the same problem. So step 4 for getting back to the moon is to find a safe landing site. But right now, the best maps of Shackleton Crater aren't detailed enough to reveal any large boulders that could cripple a spacecraft. To avoid that scenario, NASA will soon launch a new satellite called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, or LRO. If it works, the LRO will produce high-resolution images, the first step towards pinpointing the best landing site at the rugged South Pole.
Okay, let's reel it over.
The camera on the spacecraft will be able to photograph individual rocks, less than half a meter across. The LRO is also fitted with a new laser altimeter that'll help reveal the shape of those rocks by collecting topographical and temperature data to create 3D maps. Red and yellow mark steep or rocky danger zones. Green means flat and smooth. It's 2020, day 8 of the journey bringing humans back to the moon. Thanks to the LRO, they're already armed with a map to the best landing site. The Orion capsule has brought the crew over 99% of the way to the moon. But the last few kilometers will be among the most treacherous of the journey. For that, they must transfer to a completely different craft. Step 5 to return to the moon. Design a craft that not only can land 4 people safely, but house them for a week. This is the first full-scale model of the lunar lander Altair. Design engineer Clinton Doris's job is figuring how 4 astronauts can live out of this confined space for 7 days.
You see we've got one of these bunks set up. There would be 3 bunks vertically here, and then somebody that sleeps on the floor in essence. But this gives us the opportunity for all of our food storage and equipment storage. We've got storage here for our umbilicals. We've got a restroom facility, so to speak, but this is where all of the activities occur.
With cabin space so limited, the astronauts will have to ride down to the lunar surface standing.
Check, okay.
It's designed to fly only in the moon's reduced gravity, so Altair could never be realistically tested back on Earth.
Turn to the left.
This will be the first and ultimate test of how it performs, as it negotiates treacherous slopes and deadly boulders. And no one has even attempted to land in a place like this, on the edge of a lunar crater 4 kilometers deep.
We suggest getting back at 5 + 40.
In 2020, the lunar lander Altair is on its final approach to the moon.
Close out timeline.
But this landing site is a far cry from the Sea of Tranquility, where Neil Armstrong touched down over 50 years earlier. This is a slender ridge near the yawning abyss of Shackleton Crater on the moon's south pole. It's surrounded by some of the most intimidating terrain humans have ever laid eyes on. Crater walls plunge down 4 kilometers, twice as deep as the Grand Canyon. The low polar sun creates glare and confusing shadows that makes navigation difficult. Worse still, the moon has an unpredictable gravitational field that could throw them off at the last minute. At last, the astronauts feel the reassuring bump as Altair touches down near the crater rim, site of the future lunar outpost.
Go up to the crater.
For the first time in 50 years, Americans once again set foot on the moon.
Here I am, folks, in the middle of a boulder field.
Harrison Schmitt is one of just 12 Americans who have walked on the moon.
I think the biggest surprise for me was just how beautiful the place was. Here's this brilliant sun that's illuminating everything like you were in the high mountain country of the Earth or in the deserts, but the sky's black instead of blue.
That blackness hides a stark truth. There's no atmosphere on the moon, only a life-sucking vacuum. Humans wouldn't survive here more than a few minutes without one of the most complicated pieces of technology ever devised, the spacesuit.
Bob, what do you think? Can I read a gravimeter?
Nothing less than a wearable miniature spaceship, the suit must deliver air to breathe, warmth in the shade, and cooling in the sun.
Make sure it's completely off. Should not be in.
The Apollo suits of the 1960s were rigid, bulky, and only good for a few days. So, step 6 of the new mission is to devise a spacesuit that can last for several months and is easier and more flexible to move in.
That's a unique challenge because it's like inflating your tire. The more air you add into the spacesuit, the much more stiff it becomes and much more difficult it is to move. So that's definitely a design challenge that we have to overcome.
Even the gloves are inflated with air, making it hard to bend your fingers.
Oh, man.
You're talking about very stiff, unforgiving gloves. And not only do they wear your forearm muscles out very quickly,
It's all worth the effort. It hurt.
but it can also cause trauma in various parts of the hand. And we have to do much better with the next generation of spacesuits.
And figure out a better way to put them on. Unlike Apollo, the next generation of astronauts going to the moon will be able to slip easily into the back of their spacesuits. This will cut prep time for a spacewalk from several hours to just 30 minutes. The Apollo suits seem to work well at first in the moon's reduced gravity, just 1/6 of our own.
I'm getting it right now. I won't.
But they turned out to be top-heavy.
What our data is suggesting now is that we definitely want to get a center of gravity that's close to our round.
A punctured suit could have been lethal. Luckily, it didn't happen.
The guys were falling down a lot, actually. We analyzed the videotapes, and 2 to 3% of the time they were either falling down or getting back up.
But the falls caused another problem.
And so their suits got very dusty and dirty, and then they didn't have an airlock, so they had to climb back into the lander, and they got all that dust all over the lander.
Moon dust is deceptive. It preserves a footprint like fine powder. But under the microscope, you can see it's made of particles as jagged as glass. Worse still, it's statically charged, clinging to virtually everything. A deadly menace to equipment, machines, and even people.
So, yeah, we don't want to breathe dust. No question about it. What do we do about it? Well, the primary source of dust in a habitat would be the suit. Leave the suit outside.
But for astronauts to leave suits and dangerous dust outside requires step 7, a permanent outpost. To build that, they'll need supplies, lots of them. Delivering them is another job for the Altair lander, which flies unmanned when carrying cargo. These cargo flights deliver the vehicles and materials needed to set up the lunar outpost. NASA is already testing the prototype lunar rover that'll be used to transport construction materials. But the outpost itself is still a work in progress. Engineers are evaluating many different types of habitat design.
We've looked at what if we had just one large module that had maybe 500 cubic feet of space to house four astronauts. Or if we had smaller tube-type modules to build a larger facility. If something should happen to one module, you could quarantine it off, and the crew could stay safe in the other modules.
The big concern is weight. Habitation specialist Robert Howard evaluates a design that's both light and compact.
We're now inside the inflatable torus. This is a mock-up of one of the systems that the Lunar Surface Systems Project is considering for living on the moon. If you notice the curved outer wall and the beams that represent an aluminum core, you can kind of think of this as an inflatable donut.
When complete, the habitat will look something like this.
A lot of people wonder, why are we looking at inflatables? They think of these as just big balloons, and why do we want to play with balloons?
Its outer shell is actually made from a durable Kevlar-like fabric.
It's extremely rigid, it's stronger than aluminum once it's inflated, and it's designed to be able to compress into a small area, but yet expand into a large volume once deployed on the surface.
It'll take several hours for the habitat to inflate to its full size. It expands outwards from a central core containing the electrical and life support systems. Along the curved outer wall sit storage units, as well as work and lab stations. An identical adjoining unit houses the crew's living and sleeping quarters. Entrances are fitted with airlocks and magnetic filters to keep out dust. But engineers have an even more